Chapter 13. The Contrarians arrived. The transport carrying Dr. Gregor Malek touched down at Prometheus Station's main landing bay on a morning that felt heavier than it should have. The kind of morning when the recycled air tasted stale, and the lights seemed dimmer than their specifications warranted. He stepped off the ramp with the confidence of a man who had spent 40 years being right about things that other people wanted to believe. His gray hair was cropped short, his uniform immaculate, his expression carrying the faint contempt that had become his default setting when dealing with research facilities that strayed too close to the boundaries of acceptable science. Dr. Myra Okonkwo was waiting for him on the platform, her own expression carefully neutral. They had worked together before, years ago, on a project that had ended with 3 researchers being dismissed for ideological deviation. Malek had led the investigation. Okonkwo had provided the scientific analysis that made the dismissals possible. They were not friends, but they understood each other. "Dr. Okonkwo," Malek nodded in greeting. "I understand you've been here for several weeks already. I trust you've had time to assess the situation." "The situation is complicated." "Complicated?" His lips twitched, not quite a smile, but something close to it. "That's an interesting word choice. When the ministry briefed me, they used rather more colorful language. Catastrophic deviation from research protocols. Potential existential threat to facility operations. Urgent need for ideological correction. The ministry has a tendency toward hyperbole. The ministry has a tendency toward protecting its investments. PNEUBORN represents 3 decades of funding and several trillion credits in infrastructure. They don't send me to facilities where the problems are merely complicated." They walked together toward the administrative complex, past research staff who noticed Malek's arrival and quickly found reasons to be elsewhere. His reputation preceded him. The man who had ended more careers than anyone else in the Omnistate's scientific establishment. The professional skeptic who took genuine pleasure in dismantling the work of researchers who had strayed from acceptable orthodoxy. "I've read your preliminary reports," Malek continued. "Fascinating reading. Subjects claiming to be possessed by external entities, researchers documenting evidence of consciousness independent of neural substrate, mass hallucination events affecting hundreds of personnel simultaneously. The evidence is not easily dismissed. Evidence is always easily dismissed, Dr. Okonkwo. One simply needs to apply the correct framework of interpretation. A hallucination is not proof of external entities. It is proof of neural dysfunction. A subject claiming possession is not evidence of supernatural agency. It is evidence of dissociative disorder. The fact that multiple subjects exhibit similar symptoms suggests a common cause, certainly, but that cause need not be metaphysical. And if the symptoms include knowledge that the subjects couldn't possibly possess, information about events occurring in other locations, details from sealed files, personal secrets known only to individual researchers. Malek's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of uncertainty quickly suppressed. Then we look for the mechanism by which that information was obtained. Surveillance systems that were overlooked, communication channels that weren't properly secured, the human capacity for cold reading and psychological manipulation. There is always an explanation, Dr. Okonkwo. The universe is mechanistic, comprehensible, free of supernatural agency. When we encounter phenomena that appear to contradict that principle, the fault lies in our understanding, not in the nature of reality. You sound very certain. I am very certain. It's the only way to do this work effectively. He stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "Let me be clear about why I'm here. The ministry is concerned that newborn has been compromised, not by supernatural entities, but by researchers who have lost their objectivity. Tanaka has spent 30 years pursuing evidence for the existence of the soul. When he finally achieved results, he interpreted them in ways that confirmed his pre-existing beliefs. That's not science, it's theology with a laboratory. Some of the evidence is quite compelling. Compelling to whom? To people who want it to be true? Malek shook his head. I've spent 4 decades debunking claims like this. Psychics who could supposedly read minds, mystics who claimed to see the future, researchers who swore they had found proof of consciousness surviving death. Every single time when I applied rigorous methodology and refused to accept the conclusions they wanted me to reach, the evidence evaporated. And if this time is different, it won't be. His voice carried absolute certainty. Because it can't be. The universe doesn't work the way these people want it to work. Consciousness is an emergent property of neural complexity, nothing more. When the brain dies, the self ends. There is no soul, no afterlife, no realm of spirits waiting to communicate with the living. There is only matter and energy, operating according to laws that we are still in the process of fully understanding. He resumed walking, and Okonkwo fell into step beside him. Your job is to help me document the flaws in newborn's methodology, the gaps in their data collection, the biases in their interpretation, the failures of protocol that have allowed this situation to develop. My job is to take that documentation and use it to shut down the research before it contaminates the rest of the facility. And if the research is valid, if the evidence holds up under scrutiny, Malek didn't answer immediately. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, more controlled. Dr. Volkov asked that question once, 43 years ago. He was convinced that he had found proof of entities in the warp, intelligent beings that were reaching out to make contact with humanity. He presented his evidence with passion and conviction. He believed, absolutely and completely, that he had discovered something that would change our understanding of the universe. And you debunked him. I showed that his evidence could be explained through natural mechanisms, that his interpretation was influenced by pre-existing beliefs and confirmation bias, that his methodology was compromised by his emotional investment in the outcome. Malek's jaw tightened. He killed himself 3 days later, or so the official record states. You don't believe it? I believe that the human mind is fragile and that certain ideas, if taken seriously, can destroy it. Volkov believed in monsters lurking in the dark. When I took that belief away from him, he had nothing left. They reached the entrance to the administrative building. Malek paused with his hand on the door. I'm not here to destroy anyone, Dr. Okonkwo. I'm here to protect them. From themselves, from ideas that will consume them, from a path that leads nowhere good. Whatever newborn has discovered, it's not proof of souls or entities or supernatural agency. It's proof that we don't yet fully understand the mechanisms of consciousness. And the proper response to that ignorance is more research, not less. Research conducted within the boundaries of acceptable science, not speculation dressed up as evidence. He pushed open the door. Now, let's go see what Dr. Tanaka has been up to and figure out how to bring him back to reality before it's too late. The tour of the newborn facility lasted 4 hours, and with each passing minute, Malek's certainty grew more brittle. He saw the Einherjar subjects, 47 of them now, ranging from the adjusted and functional to the restrained and screaming. He reviewed the data from hundreds of transfers, noting the consistency of the results, the precision of the methodology, the care with which every variable had been controlled. He interviewed Dr. Tanaka, who presented his findings with the weary patience of a man who had stopped expecting to be believed. He spoke with Dr. Sato, whose technical expertise was undeniable and whose documentation was meticulous. He examined the spirit stones in their display cases, watching the patterns pulse within them, feeling the strange pressure of something that might have been attention focused on his thoughts. And he found himself, despite everything he believed, starting to wonder. The evidence was not what he had expected. There were no obvious flaws in the methodology, no glaring gaps in the data collection, no signs of the confirmation bias that he had come prepared to document. PNEUBORN's research was rigorous, thorough, and devastatingly clear in its implications. Consciousness could be transferred from one substrate to another. The process was repeatable and consistent. And something was happening to the subjects that couldn't be explained by any natural mechanism he could identify. "You're troubled," Okonkwo observed as they walked back toward the guest quarters that evening. "I'm processing." Malek's voice was clipped. "The data is extensive. I need time to review it properly before drawing conclusions." The data suggests that Tanaka is right, that consciousness exists independently of neural substrate, that the soul or something very like it is real. The data suggests anomalies that we don't yet understand. That's not the same thing. But if the anomalies are consistent, if they appear across hundreds of subjects in controlled conditions with no mechanism for conventional explanation, at what point do we stop calling them anomalies and start accepting them as evidence? Malek stopped walking. They were in a quiet corridor, far from the main traffic areas, with no one to overhear. "Let me tell you something about belief," he said slowly. "Something I learned a long time ago when I was young and still capable of being shaken by things I didn't understand." He leaned against the wall, suddenly looking every one of his 73 years. "When I was 24, I investigated a case on Mars Colony 7. A woman who claimed to channel the spirits of the dead, not occasionally, not under special circumstances, but constantly, reliably, in ways that could be documented and verified. She knew things that no living person could have known. She described events from the past with perfect accuracy. She predicted the future with a success rate that made statistical analysis meaningless. What happened? I spent 6 months trying to debunk her. I investigated every aspect of her life, looking for sources of information she might have accessed, tricks she might have employed, explanations that would fit within the framework I believed in. I found nothing. Absolutely nothing. His voice dropped. And then one night she asked to speak with me privately. She told me things about my own past, things I had never told anyone, things that existed only in my memories. She described my father's death, which I had witnessed as a child. She told me his last words, which I had never shared with a single living soul. And then she said something that I will never forget. What did she say? She said, "You're going to spend the rest of your life running from this moment. You're going to convince yourself that I'm a fraud, that there's an explanation you simply haven't found yet. And you'll be right to do that, Gregor. Because if you accept what you've seen tonight, if you truly accept it, you won't be able to function anymore. Some truths are too big for human minds to hold." He pushed off from the wall, straightening his uniform. I took her advice. I found explanations, or convinced myself I had. I wrote a report that attributed her abilities to cold reading, psychological manipulation, and undiscovered information channels. I ended her career and preserved my sanity. And you've been doing the same thing ever since. I've been protecting people from truths that would destroy them, from ideas that sound liberating but lead only to madness, from doors that once opened can never be closed again. He met Okonkwo's eyes. PNEUBORN has opened one of those doors. Whether what's on the other side is souls or aliens or something else entirely, the result will be the same. Humanity isn't ready for this. We've built our entire civilization on the certainty that death is final, that consciousness is physical, that the universe contains no supernatural agency. If we're wrong about that, if Tanaka is right and I've spent 40 years suppressing the truth, then everything we've built comes crashing down. Maybe it should. Maybe, but not today. Not while I still have the power to prevent it. He turned away. I'm going to review the data again, all of it, and I'm going to find the flaw that everyone else has missed. The explanation that makes all of this comprehensible without requiring us to abandon everything we believe. And if you don't find it, Malek's voice was barely audible, then I'll do what I've always done. I'll bury the evidence, discredit the researchers, and write a report that lets everyone sleep at night. Because some lies are necessary, Dr. Okonkwo, some truths are too dangerous to be spoken. He walked away, leaving her alone in the corridor, wondering which would be worse, if he was wrong about everything or if he was right. Chapter 14, The Third Signal 3 nights later. Dr. Gregor Malek sat alone in a borrowed laboratory, surrounded by equipment he had requisitioned specifically for this investigation. It was past midnight, the facility quiet, the corridors empty of everyone except the security patrols and the sleepless. He had told himself he needed to work without distractions. The truth was simpler. He didn't want anyone to see what he was doing, didn't want witnesses to his methodology or his results, didn't want to be held accountable if he found something he couldn't explain. The neural mapping array was his own design, developed over decades of investigating claims of psychic phenomena. It could detect and analyze patterns of brain activity with a precision that exceeded anything in the standard scientific toolkit. Not because the standard tools were inadequate, but because Malek had never trusted anyone else's instruments. When debunking the impossible, you needed to be certain that the impossible wasn't hiding in the gaps of your own methodology. He had spent the previous 2 days mapping normal human subjects, staff members who had volunteered for baseline comparisons. Their neural patterns were clean, comprehensible, precisely what neuroscience predicted they should be. Consciousness as emergent property, cognition as electrochemical process, mind as machine. Tonight, he was mapping an Einherjar. Subject 42 had been selected specifically because she represented Newborn's best-case scenario. A voluntary transfer, 6 months post-integration, exhibiting none of the severe dysphoria or dissociative symptoms that plagued other subjects. By every standard measure, she was a success, proof that consciousness could survive transfer and thrive in a new substrate. If there was a flaw in Newborn's methodology, a gap in their reasoning, a natural explanation for what they claimed to have achieved, Subject 42 was where he would find it. Beginning neural mapping sequence, he muttered to himself, fingers moving across the interface. Subject is conscious and responsive. Baseline readings are stable. The display filled with data, waves of activity, patterns of connection, the infinitely complex dance of consciousness doing whatever consciousness did when it existed. At first, everything looked normal. The readings matched what he would expect from a human brain, albeit processed through artificial substrate rather than biological tissue. The architecture was different, but the underlying patterns were the same. Then he noticed the third signal. It was subtle, so subtle that standard equipment would never have detected it. A faint pattern underlying the primary neural activity, pulsing at frequencies that shouldn't have been possible in the Einherjar substrate. Malek frowned, adjusted his instruments, ran the scan again. The third signal was still there, stronger now as if responding to his attention. "That's not possible," he murmured. "The substrate doesn't support that frequency range. There's no mechanism for," he stopped. ran the scan a third time, a fourth. The signal grew stronger with each iteration, and it was changing, not randomly but purposefully, adapting, responding, learning. Malek's hands were trembling as he pulled up the comparison data from his baseline scans of normal human subjects. The primary patterns matched as expected. The secondary patterns, the deeper cognitive architecture, also matched within acceptable parameters, but none of the normal subjects had the third signal. It existed only in the Einherjar. "What are you?" he whispered to the screen. The signal pulsed, and for just a moment, Malek had the overwhelming sensation that something was looking back at him through the data, something vast and patient and terribly amused. He spent the next 6 hours scanning every Einherjar subject he could access, comparing their readings to his baselines, documenting what he found with the meticulous care that had defined his entire career. The results were undeniable. Every Einherjar had the third signal. Every single one, from the best-adjusted success stories to the screaming, restrained failures. The pattern varied slightly between subjects, stronger in some, weaker in others, more developed in those who had been transferred longer, but it was always present. And in the subjects who had accepted the transformation, who spoke of family and welcomed whatever was happening to them, the third signal wasn't just present. It was dominant, overwhelming the primary consciousness, reshaping the neural architecture from within. They're not just transferring consciousness, Malek realized, his voice hollow. They're creating vessels, empty spaces that something else is filling. He pulled up the data from Subject 42 again, focusing on the correlation between her conscious awareness and the third signal. The numbers told a story that he didn't want to read. The third signal spiked during moments of emotional intensity. It grew stronger when she spoke about certain topics, her past, her fears, her hopes for the future. It responded to her thoughts, her memories, her sense of self. It was feeding on her. Slowly, gradually, imperceptibly. The third signal was consuming everything that made Subject 42 who she was. Her personality, her memories, her identity, all of it was being absorbed, incorporated, transformed into something else. She wasn't living in the Einherjar body anymore. She was being digested by it, and she had no idea. Her conscious mind still functioned, still experienced itself as continuous and whole. But underneath, in the spaces between thoughts, something else was growing, something that would eventually replace her entirely, wearing her memories like a comfortable disguise. Malek stared at the data, his worldview crumbling around him. For 40 years, he had insisted that the universe was mechanistic, comprehensible, free of supernatural agency. He had built his career on that certainty, destroyed the work of researchers who threatened it, convinced himself that every anomaly could be explained if you just looked hard enough. Now his own instruments, calibrated to his own exacting standards, were showing him something that his framework couldn't contain. The soul existed. Consciousness was something separate from matter, something that could be moved and stored and transferred. Tanaka had been right all along, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what else existed, the things that his readings were detecting alongside the transferred consciousness. The hungry presences that lurked in the gaps between substrates, waiting for someone to open a door. The third signal wasn't human. It had never been human. It was something that had been waiting in the dark for a very long time, and humanity had finally given it a way in. Dawn was breaking over the facility when Dr. Okonkwo found Malek still sitting in the laboratory, surrounded by screens displaying data that he hadn't stopped staring at for hours. "You've been in here all night," she said carefully. "The staff reported seeing lights. I thought I should check on you." Malek didn't turn around. "Look at this." She moved to stand beside him, scanning the displays. Her expertise in neural mapping wasn't as extensive as his, but she could read the basic patterns, could see the anomaly that he was highlighting. What am I looking at? Proof. His voice was exhausted, broken. Proof that I've been wrong about everything, that Tanaka was right, that consciousness exists independently of substrate, that souls are real, that the universe is not what I spent 40 years insisting it was. Gregor, but that's not the worst part. He finally turned to face her, and she was shocked by what she saw. His face was gray, his eyes hollow, his certainty crumbled into something that looked like despair. The worst part is this. He highlighted another section of the data, the third signal, pulsing beneath the conscious awareness of Subject 42. There's something else in there with her. Something that's not human, was never human, doesn't belong in our reality, and it's in every single Einherjar we've created. Okonkwo studied the data, her own expression growing more troubled with each passing second. What is it? I don't know, but I know what it's doing. It's feeding on them, growing inside them, learning to wear their identities like masks. His hands clenched. The subjects who talk about family, who say they've been welcomed into something larger, they're not delusional. They're accurate, something is welcoming them, something that wants more than just consciousness transfer. You're saying Newborn has been building vessels for, what? Demons, aliens, entities from the warp. I'm saying that every time they transfer a human consciousness into an Einherjar body, they're opening a door. And something is coming through that door alongside the consciousness they're trying to save. He laughed bitterly. I've spent 40 years telling people that there are no monsters in the dark, that the universe is safe and comprehensible and explicable through natural law. I destroyed careers, ended research programs, suppressed evidence, all in service of a framework that I now know is fundamentally wrong. What are you going to do? Malek was silent for a long moment. The right thing would be to publish this, to admit that I was wrong, that the evidence supports conclusions I spent my life denying, to warn everyone about what PNEUBORN has unleashed and hope that we can find a way to stop it. But I've spent 40 years building institutions, relationships, systems of control that depend on the certainty I was wrong about. If I come out and say that souls are real and demons are invading through consciousness transfer technology, I won't be believed. I'll be dismissed as a man who finally cracked under the pressure. And the people who need to hear the warning won't listen because the messenger has been discredited. He stood, moving to the window, looking out at the facility spread beneath the eternal twilight of the gas giant's reflected light. Or I could do what I've always done, bury the evidence, write a report that explains away the anomalies, let Newborn continue while I work behind the scenes to limit the damage. That's not a solution. It's just delay. Sometimes delay is all you have. He turned back to face her. There's one more thing I need to do before I decide, one more piece of evidence I need to gather. What's that? I need to interview one of the subjects directly. Not through official channels, not with Newborn staff present. Just me and them face to face so I can see for myself what's looking out through their eyes. He pulled up a personnel file on the nearest screen. Subject 44. Robert Vestergaard. Voluntary transfer 3 months post-integration. Listed as one of the successful cases, well-adjusted, no significant dysphoria. Why him? Because his third signal readings are unusual. Lower than the others, but with a different pattern. Almost as if there's conflict between the original consciousness and whatever else is in there. If there's any subject who might still be fighting, who might be able to tell us what's really happening inside an Einherjar mind, it's him. He closed the file. Set up an interview. Tomorrow, first thing. Tell Tanaka it's part of my standard evaluation protocol. He won't question it. And make sure we're not interrupted. You think he's still in there? The real Robert Vestergaard? Malek's expression was bleak. I think that's what I need to find out, because if he is, if there's still a human being trapped inside that body, watching while something else wears his face, then we're not just dealing with a failed research program. We're dealing with a horror beyond anything I ever imagined. He moved toward the door, and if we're lucky, he might be able to tell us how to stop it. But his voice didn't carry much hope. And as Okonkwo watched him go, she found herself wondering if stopping it was even possible anymore, or if the door had been open too long, and the things on the other side were already too deeply entrenched to be driven back. Chapter 15, The Wrong Bob. The interview room was small, clinical, designed for the kind of conversations that no one wanted to have. A table bolted to the floor, chairs on either side, recording equipment that captured every word and expression for later analysis. Dr. Malek sat on one side. Dr. Okonkwo sat beside him, her tablet ready to compare responses against the subject's pre-transfer personality profile. On the other side of the table, the thing that called itself Robert Vestergaard smiled warmly and maintained direct eye contact. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with us," Malek began, his voice carefully neutral. "Please state your name for the record." "Robert Vestergaard, but please, Bob. Everyone calls me Bob." Okonkwo glanced at the profile on her tablet. Subject rarely initiated casual conversation. Preferred formal address with strangers. She made a note. "How are you feeling, Mr. Vestergaard?" "Wonderful, actually. Better than I've felt in years." The Einherjar leaned forward with apparent enthusiasm, its eyes bright and engaged. "There's something clarifying about waking up in a new body, don't you think? All that biological noise, the aches, the pains, the slow decay, gone, just pure awareness now." Another glance at the profile. The original Bob had been described as taciturn, reserved, uncomfortable with extended conversation. In pre-transfer interviews, he had answered questions in single words or short phrases, never elaborating unless directly pressed. This version of Bob was eloquent, expansive, eager to share. "You seem quite energized," Okonkwo observed. "Shouldn't I be?" The Einherjar spread its hands in a gesture that looked rehearsed. "I was dead, Dr. Okonkwo. Dead and gone and finished. And now I'm here talking to you, feeling my lungs fill with air. It's a miracle. Surely I'm allowed to be excited. Your file describes you as reserved, taciturn. Your sister used that word specifically." Ingrid. "Yes, well." A rueful expression crossed the Einherjar's face, appropriate, convincing, perfectly timed. "I spent 67 years being reserved, Dr. Okonkwo. 67 years of keeping my head down, never making waves, waiting for something that never came. Maybe dying changed my perspective. Maybe I decided that if I got a second chance, I wasn't going to waste it being the same quiet man who never lived while he was alive." The logic was reasonable. The explanation made sense, but something in Okonkwo's gut tightened, some instinct that she couldn't quite identify. Malek leaned forward. "Tell us about your work on Titan." "Cargo supervision. 40 years of watching crates move from here to there." The Einherjar's smile took on a self-deprecating edge. "Not exactly the life of adventure I dreamed of as a boy." Okonkwo flagged the response. The original Bob had never expressed dissatisfaction with his work. In multiple interviews, he had described it as good work and honest. "You dreamed of adventure. Didn't everyone? Before life closes in, before you realize that existence is mostly just maintenance, keeping things running, moving boxes so other people can do whatever they do with what's inside. That's surprisingly philosophical. Death will do that to you." The smile widened. "Highly recommended for gaining perspective. Well, with the proper follow-up procedure, of course." A joke. The original Bob had never made jokes during recorded interviews, not once in 2 years of documentation. Malek was watching the Einherjar with an intensity that bordered on predatory. The file says you enjoyed model building. Little ships, little stations, tiny versions of the big things I watched fly past every day. A nostalgic expression. Something to do with the hands while the mind wanders. Where did your mind wander? Oh, you know, the usual, what it all means, whether any of it matters. A pause. The questions everyone asks when they're alone with their thoughts. Okonkwo checked the profile again. Subject avoids existential topics. Deflects questions about death with monosyllabic responses. Expressed discomfort with philosophical talk. Your pre-transfer assessment notes that you were uncomfortable with philosophical discussions. Did it? The Einherjar's expression flickered, just for a moment, too fast to identify. Perhaps I wasn't being honest with your colleagues, Dr. Okonkwo. People perform, don't they? We show the version of ourselves we think others want to see. Maybe the real Bob was always more thoughtful than he let on. The explanation was smooth, delivered with confidence. Too smooth, too confident. Let's discuss your sister, Malek said. Ingrid. The Einherjar's expression shifted to something more guarded, appropriate for a difficult topic, exactly what the files suggested the original Bob would have shown. What about her? You had a falling out 8 years before your death. Yes, a disagreement, personal matters. We both said things we shouldn't have. What was the disagreement about? A choice I made. Something she disapproved of. A pause that felt calculated. A relationship she found unsuitable. Okonkwo looked up. The file doesn't specify the nature of the disagreement. Ingrid declined to elaborate when interviewed. Well, I'm telling you now. The Einherjar met her eyes directly. It was a relationship, a woman she didn't approve of. What was this woman's name? A beat of hesitation, barely perceptible. Helena, we can verify that with Ingrid. Can you? The smile tightened almost imperceptibly. I'm not sure she'd remember. It was a long time ago, and Ingrid always had a talent for forgetting things that made her uncomfortable. The deflection was elegant. If Ingrid didn't remember, the subject had pre-explained it. If she did, the subject was verified. But the original Bob had never been elegant, had never anticipated objections or constructed preemptive defenses. Malek pressed on. Let's try some verification questions. Your mother's maiden name. Lindqvist. Correct, your first supervisor on Titan. Yusuf Okafor died in the pressure failure of 9. A hint of what might have been genuine sadness. He was a good man. Correct, your favorite meal. Grilled whitefish with lemon and dill, my mother's recipe. Silence fell over the room. You're certain? Malek's voice was carefully controlled. Of course. Why do you ask? Your medical file documents 3 anaphylactic episodes in response to fish proteins. Severe allergy. You haven't eaten fish since you were 12 years old. The Einherjar went still. Not frozen in thought, still in the way that something mechanical goes still when processing an unexpected input. The transfer must have scrambled something. The recovery was quick, the smile returning. Memory formation in a new substrate, there are bound to be artifacts, glitches. Dr. Tanaka's team warned me about this. You remembered your mother's maiden name correctly, your first supervisor's name. Details from 60 years ago transferred without glitches. Some memories are more robust than others. A shrug. Food preferences are hardly core identity markers. For someone who nearly died 3 times from eating fish, I would expect the allergy to be very much a core memory. Another pause. The Einherjar's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind its eyes. A calculation, a recalibration. I'm sure the real Bob, it caught itself, the words truncating mid-sentence. I'm sure I had more important things occupying my neural pathways. Okonkwo's pen stopped moving. What did you just say? I said food preferences aren't. You said the real Bob, as if you were referring to someone else. The stillness again. Longer this time, the smile remained fixed, but it no longer reached the eyes if it ever had. A figure of speech. The voice was careful now, measured. The pre-transfer Bob, the biological Bob. You know what I meant. Do we? The Einherjar leaned forward, and its voice dropped to something almost confiding. Dr. Malek, Dr. Okonkwo, I understand what you're doing. You're testing me, looking for inconsistencies, making sure I'm really me and not some corruption or copy or whatever you're worried about. I appreciate the thoroughness. It spread its hands, that same rehearsed gesture of openness. But I need you to understand something. I died. I experienced the cessation of everything I was, and then I woke up here in this body with all my memories and thoughts and feelings, but also with the knowledge that I had been dead and am now not. That changes a person. I can't be exactly the same as I was. I've seen something that the pre-transfer Bob never saw. The speech was eloquent, persuasive, delivered with perfect emotional cadence. It was also completely wrong for a man who couldn't string more than 3 sentences together in 2 years of documented interviews. One more question, Malek said quietly. Of course. When you were in the space between during the transfer, what did you experience? The Einherjar went still again. When it spoke, its voice was different, slower, more careful. Darkness, but not empty darkness. Darkness that was full, aware. Its eyes grew distant, like being in a room where you can't see anything, but you know you're not alone. Did you sense other presences? I sensed potential possibilities. Versions of myself that could exist might exist. It looked down at its hands. It was like being unmade and remade at the same time, all the pieces of Bob scattered across something and then gathered back together. Were all the pieces gathered? The Einherjar looked up, and for just a moment, the space of a heartbeat, something else looked out through its eyes. Something vast and cold and terribly amused. Then it was gone. The warm smile returned. Well, I'm here, aren't I? All present and accounted for. A light laugh. Every tedious memory of cargo manifests and model ship assembly instructions right where it should be. It stood smoothly. I think perhaps we're overthinking this, doctors. You wanted to bring back the dead. You brought back the dead. Maybe just accept the victory instead of looking for reasons to doubt it. It moved toward the door, then paused, turning back. One thing I forgot to mention, during the transfer in that space between I heard something. Voices, maybe, or one voice with many parts. A frown as if trying to remember. It said, "Thank you." Isn't that strange? I wonder what for. The door closed behind it. The silence in the interview room stretched for a long moment. Behind the observation glass where Dr. Tanaka had been watching, the shapes of technicians moved, making notes, adjusting equipment. That wasn't Robert Vestergaard, Malek said finally, his voice hollow. Okonkwo set down her tablet. Her hands, she noticed, were trembling. Every deviation can be explained. Transfer artifacts, personality adaptation, the psychological impact of death and resurrection. He described fish as his favorite meal, a meal that would have killed him. Malek turned to face her. A man doesn't forget anaphylaxis, doesn't forget the terror of his throat closing, his body betraying him, the certainty of death from something as simple as food. The substrate has nothing to do with it. Whatever is in that body, it doesn't have access to Robert Vestergaard's visceral memories. It knows facts, names, dates, the contents of files, but it doesn't know what it felt like to be him. It's reading from a script without understanding the character. He stood abruptly, moving to the window that looked out over the newborn facility. And it slipped. The real Bob, it said. For just a moment, it forgot to pretend that it was the person it's claiming to be. If you're right, if that thing isn't Robert Vestergaard, then what is it? Malek's reflection in the glass looked older than he felt, more tired, more afraid. It's what my instruments detected. The third signal. Something that came through alongside the consciousness they transferred, or something that was waiting in the substrate when it arrived. Something that's learning to wear human identity like a costume, getting better with practice, refining its performance every day. And the real Vestergaard? Trapped somewhere inside, maybe, watching through eyes that don't belong to him anymore, screaming in a voice no one can hear. He turned away from the window. Or consumed entirely, digested, used as raw material for whatever is wearing his face now. Through the glass, they could see the Einherjar walking back toward the residential wing, pausing to exchange pleasantries with a staff member who had known the original Bob Vestergaard. It looks so normal, Okonkwo whispered. It sounds so convincing. If we hadn't caught the fish allergy, we would have cleared it, marked it as a successful integration. Let it walk around this facility, interacting with hundreds of people, learning to be more human with every conversation. Malek gathered his materials, his movements sharp with barely controlled emotion. I need to talk to Tanaka. I need to show him what we've found, make him understand what his program has actually created. He won't believe you. He's spent 30 years. I know. I've spent 40 years doing exactly what he did, believing something so deeply that I couldn't see the evidence against it. His voice cracked slightly. Maybe that's why I have to be the one to tell him, because I understand exactly how hard it is to let go of something you've built your life around. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Find the others. The Einherjar who show the same patterns as Vestergaard. The inconsistencies, the slips, the moments when the mask doesn't quite fit. Document everything. If we're going to convince anyone that this program needs to be shut down, we need evidence that even the most committed believers can't explain away. And if we can't find enough evidence, Malek's expression was bleak. Then we prepare for the alternative, because whatever those things are, they're learning, getting better, and eventually they're going to stop pretending entirely. What happens then? I don't know. He opened the door. But I suspect we're going to find out much sooner than any of us would like. He stepped through, leaving Okonkwo alone with the recordings and the data and the terrible certainty that everything they thought they knew about death and consciousness and the nature of reality was about to come crashing down. Through the window, the thing wearing Robert Vestergaard's face turned and looked back at the interview room. It couldn't see through the one-way glass, shouldn't have been able to know it was being watched. But it smiled anyway. That warm, welcoming, utterly empty smile. And somewhere deep inside the skull that had once belonged to a quiet man who built model ships, the real Robert Vestergaard continued to scream in a voice that no one would ever hear.